The galaxy was in chaos. Worlds once teeming with life were now silent, consumed by an unknown force that had spread across the stars like wildfire. Systems, rich in resources and civilizations, were being swallowed whole, leaving only dead space in their wake. Desperation filled the air as the leaders of the galaxy scrambled for answers, unable to comprehend the full scale of the destruction. Starships that had once been mighty symbols of power now drifted aimlessly in space, abandoned by their crews or destroyed by an invisible force. Entire fleets had disappeared without a trace, their signals lost to the vast emptiness. On the edge of the galaxy, the Galactic Council convened in a state of panic. The mighty assembly of races, once united by a shared vision of peace and prosperity, now faced the grim reality that their control over the universe was slipping away. Desperate messages were sent across the cosmos, hoping for a miracle. Yet, all their calls fell on deaf ears. Even the most powerful species in the galaxy, known for their technological marvels and unmatched might, were struggling to make sense of the disaster unfolding before them. But amidst the despair, one signal stood out from all the others. It was faint, barely more than a whisper in the void, but it was there. A transmission originating from Earth, the home of humanity, a species that had long been disregarded by the galactic elite. The message wasn't long, but its meaning was clear. We hear you. Help is on the way. The leaders of the council, skeptical at first, listened in stunned silence. Earth had been quiet for centuries, its people content with their isolation from the galaxy. Humanity, though known for its fierce independence and brutal history on their death world, was far removed from galactic politics. Yet here they were, responding when no one else had. The signal carried a weight of certainty, a bold promise to a dying galaxy. The question on everyone's mind was simple: how could a species so far removed from galactic affairs offer hope when the galaxy's finest could not? The council chambers erupted in debate. The Zorak, one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, were the first to voice their disbelief. This is madness. Zorak, their leader, barked, slamming his fist on the table. Humanity has no place in this fight. They've barely survived their own world's chaos. How can they offer any assistance? But others were less certain. Tarek, the representative of the Shalak, a species known for their wisdom, leaned forward. Do we really have a choice? We've seen the destruction. No one is coming to our aid. Humanity may be our last hope. His voice was calm, measured, but there was a hint of fear behind his words. The Shalak had long watched the humans, their brutal history something both feared and admired. If anyone had the strength to survive, it was them. In the back of the room, the Vorgan leader, an alien species of immense intellect and quiet power, spoke softly but with conviction. Perhaps we should listen. Earth's history has been one of survival against impossible odds. If they say help is on the way, I would like to see what they can do. Zorak shot him a glare, but it was clear that the council was divided. There was no consensus, no easy answer to the growing problem. The galaxy was falling apart, and every moment spent debating could cost them more than they were willing to lose. Yet, no one could deny the growing sense of urgency in the air. The SOS was not just a message of hope, it was a lifeline. Earth was a death world, a planet known for its brutal nature. On Earth, survival was a constant struggle. Humanity had spent millennia fighting against every challenge their planet threw at them. Climate change, hostile species, and even their own kind. They had faced extinction more than once, yet had always emerged stronger. Perhaps that was what made them different from the other species. While the galaxy's elites debated over tactics and alliances, humanity had been tested by real battles. Those fought against nature, against their own fears, and against each other. In every galactic capital, the same question was being asked. Could humanity's brutal warriors, known as the Deathworlders, truly be the answer to the galaxy's dying breath? Or was this their final act of defiance, a declaration that they would not fall without a fight? On Earth, as the message was transmitted across the stars, the Deathworlders were preparing. They had received the SOS, and their response was swift and decisive. The Deathworlders were humanity's fiercest warriors, each one a product of a brutal environment that shaped them into the galaxy's deadliest soldiers. For them, survival was a way of life. The universe was no different than their death world. It was just another battleground. Humanity's leaders knew that answering the call would not be easy. They would be forced to leave their home planet, abandoning their isolated existence, and venture into the unknown. The galaxy had always viewed them with disdain. Humanity was seen as a young species, a race that had barely made its mark in the vastness of space. But now, the galaxy was turning to them, hoping they would be the ones to save it. The Deathworlders weren't just warriors. They were a symbol of humanity's will to survive. They had fought their way through the darkest parts of their own history, and now they were ready to fight for the entire galaxy. They would answer the call. They would show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. The fleet assembled, ready to leave Earth's atmosphere and face the unknown. They were a mix of soldiers, engineers, scientists, and tacticians, each one a specialist in their own right. But they all shared one thing: the unbreakable will of a Deathworlder. They would not fail. Not this time. As the ships broke through the atmosphere, humanity's fleet set its sights on the dying galaxy. A promise had been made. Help was on the way. And the galaxy would soon learn the true power of humanity's Deathworlders. The first ship of humanity's fleet emerged from Earth's atmosphere, its massive form cutting through the darkness of space with a silent power that made even the most seasoned galactic explorers pause. Behind it, a dozen more followed, each ship a marvel of human engineering, designed for one purpose: survival. The Deathworlders, humanity's finest warriors, were on board, each one silently preparing for the unknown dangers ahead. They were a diverse group, chosen not only for their battle skills, but for their ability to adapt to any situation. They were survivors, trained to fight not only against enemies, but against the very forces of nature. On their homeworld, they had been tested by the harshest conditions. Now they would face a galaxy on the brink of collapse. The fleet wasn't alone. Several smaller, faster ships from allied races joined humanity's vessels. The Zorak, once so dismissive of humanity's abilities, now followed in cautious silence, their warships flanking the human fleet. They had their doubts, but the rising desperation in their ranks was enough to make them swallow their pride. Their species, too, was on the verge of extinction, and if humanity was truly their last hope, they would be forced to trust them. The Shellac, a race of highly intelligent beings, provided the strategic guidance. Their culture prized knowledge, and they had studied the stars for millennia. Yet even their wisdom had failed to predict the true nature of the galactic disaster. Now, they placed their faith in the hands of the Deathworlders, hoping that the unyielding survival instincts of humanity could turn the tide. The fleet traveled at breakneck speed, using the fastest routes through the galaxy. They passed through nebulae, dodged asteroid fields, and navigated dangerous solar storms. Every obstacle was met with swift and decisive action, but as they ventured deeper into the galaxy, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The reports from the front lines were bleak. The mysterious force that had begun to consume star systems seemed to be everywhere, spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. The Deathworlders, however, were undeterred. They were used to the unknown. They had grown up in the most dangerous conditions imaginable, fighting for survival in a world where every step could lead to death. Their instincts were honed, and they knew that fear would only slow them down. They were the ones who had learned to adapt and fight back, even when the odds were impossible. Now, they were about to face an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The fleet's first destination was a once thriving planet known as Thelia. It had been a hub of trade and culture, home to millions of peaceful inhabitants. But now, it was nothing more than a barren wasteland. The planet's surface was cracked, and the atmosphere was thick with the stench of decay. The Deathworlders deployed to the surface immediately, their boots hitting the cracked ground with a dull thud. They quickly spread out, scanning the area for any signs of life or danger. What they found was beyond anything they had imagined. The entire planet was in a state of disarray, its once beautiful cities now reduced to rubble. In the distance, a towering mass of energy pulsed ominously, radiating a strange and deadly force. The source of the destruction was clear. It was the very thing that had been consuming the galaxy. The energy was unlike anything the Deathworlders had ever encountered. It seemed to be alive, feeding off the planet's resources and twisting the environment into something unrecognizable. "Prepare yourselves," one of the Deathworlders muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. His words, though simple, carried the weight of experience. He had seen worlds fall before, but this was different. The energy swirling in front of them wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature. It was a living thing, and it was hungry. As the Deathworlders approached the source of the energy, they felt it. A cold, gnawing sensation at the back of their minds, like something was watching them, studying their every move. They had been trained to fight physical enemies, to face dangers in the form of beasts and soldiers. But this was different. The energy wasn't a physical entity. It was a presence, an intelligence that seemed to mock their every step. "This isn't just an attack," one of the soldiers said, his voice shaky. It's a message." The others nodded grimly. They had heard the stories, the rumors of an ancient, powerful race that had once ruled the galaxy, beings capable of manipulating the very fabric of reality itself. Some believed they had gone extinct. But now, the Deathworlders were beginning to wonder, was this the work of the Pharaoh? The energy suddenly intensified, and the ground beneath them trembled. The Deathworlders tightened their grip on their weapons, knowing that this wasn't a moment for hesitation. They had to fight. They had no choice. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Without warning, the energy erupted, sending shockwaves through the planet's surface. The Deathworlders were thrown off their feet, their bodies crashing into the ground. The air was filled with a deafening roar as the energy spread outward, consuming everything in its path. The soldiers scrambled to their feet, fighting against the wave of destruction that threatened to tear them apart. "Fall back," one of the commanders shouted, but the words were lost in the chaos. The energy continued to pulse, sending blasts of raw power at anything that came near. The Deathworlders had faced many enemies before, but this was different. They couldn't fight this with mere strength alone. In the distance, a massive shadow appeared, looming over the horizon. It was not a ship, but a massive creature, unlike anything they had ever seen. It was ancient, its form a mix of organic and mechanical parts, its body covered in strange, glowing markings. The Deathworlders froze for a moment, understanding now that the galaxy's greatest threat was not just a force of destruction, it was a living, breathing entity. The battle for Thalia had only just begun, but the Deathworlders knew one thing for certain. The galaxy's final hope rested in their hands, and they would not let it slip away. The Deathworlders had learned to fight against everything the universe could throw at them, but this was something beyond their wildest imaginations. The massive creature on the horizon lumbered toward them, its every step sending tremors through the cracked surface of Thalia. Its glowing markings seemed to pulse in rhythm with the strange energy that surrounded it, as if it were somehow the source of the destruction. For the first time in a long while, the Deathworlders felt an unfamiliar chill of uncertainty. "Form up," barked Captain Dran, the leader of the Deathworlder team, snapping his men into action. He had seen his share of monstrous enemies, beasts from Earth's wildest jungles, alien creatures with fangs sharper than any sword, and enemies that could tear apart an entire battalion with a single strike. But this was different. This wasn't just a monster or a weapon. This was something much more dangerous. The creature was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest warships humanity had ever built, and its body seemed to be a fusion of organic matter and metallic components, parts of it shifting and changing as it moved, almost like it was adapting to the environment. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were glowing with an unnatural energy that sent waves of dread through anyone who looked at them. They could feel it, deep in their bones. This creature wasn't just here to fight. It was here to consume, to destroy everything in its path. "We need to stop it before it reaches the heart of the city," Dran said, his voice calm but filled with the intensity of a seasoned leader. He turned to his team, each one of them hardened by years of brutal combat on Earth. "The Zorik ships are positioned on the outskirts. They'll bombard it from a distance, but it's up to us to get close, take out the core. We can't let this thing spread its energy any further. Once it begins absorbing the planet, it'll be unstoppable." The team quickly spread out, weapons drawn, their bodies moving with practiced efficiency. They knew what was at stake. If they didn't stop this creature now, it would tear through the entire planet, consuming everything in its wake. The fate of the galaxy hung on their ability to succeed. As they advanced, the creature didn't slow down. It was as if it had been expecting them all along, its every movement deliberate, its eyes never leaving the soldiers. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second, until it turned into a deafening roar. The ground beneath their feet quaked as the energy around the creature intensified. It was as if the creature itself was drawing more power from the planet, feeding on it, preparing for something. Then, without warning, the creature unleashed a massive pulse of energy, a wave so powerful that it sent shockwaves through the ground, knocking the Deathworlders off their feet. Some of them struggled to maintain their balance, but others were thrown backward, their bodies crashing into the jagged rocks scattered across the landscape. It felt as though the very planet itself was being ripped apart, its bones cracked open by the force of the creature's attack. "Get up," Dran shouted, scrambling to his feet and pulling his soldiers back into formation. "Focus. We need to keep moving forward." Despite the pain, the Deathworlders were relentless. They had faced worse before. Earth had been a brutal teacher, and they had learned from it. Every fight was an opportunity to improve, to grow stronger. Now was no different. They had been trained to endure the impossible, and they would do so again. The team advanced cautiously, taking cover behind what little debris remained of Thalia's ruined city. The air was thick with dust and debris, making it difficult to see, but they couldn't afford to waste time. The creature was drawing closer, its massive form casting a shadow over them as it moved. Suddenly, one of the Deathworlders, a young soldier named Kale, raised his hand, signaling for everyone to halt. He crouched down, his eyes scanning the area. "I can feel it," he muttered, his voice tense. "It's not just us. There's something else out there, something worse." The others looked around, their weapons at the ready. They couldn't see anything, but Kale's instincts had never been wrong. His senses, sharpened through years of surviving on Earth's dangerous landscapes, had never steered him wrong. The team knew to trust him, even in the face of the unknown. "Stay alert," Dran ordered, his voice low and cautious. "If Kale says there's something out there, we'll be ready." The team continued to move forward, but now with more caution, their eyes darting around for any signs of movement. The creature's energy pulses had stopped for the moment, but there was a palpable sense of something lurking just beyond their vision. The air was thick with tension, and it felt as though the very ground beneath them was holding its breath. Then, in a blur of movement, something emerged from the shadows. It was fast, too fast for the naked eye to track. A flash of dark energy tore through the air, and before the Deathworlders could react, one of their own was gone. The soldier, a seasoned veteran named Jax, had been ripped from the team in a single instant, his body consumed by the dark energy before anyone could even raise a weapon. "Jax," Dran shouted, his voice filled with rage. "Get him back. Now." But it was too late. The energy had already dissipated into the air. leaving nothing but an empty, cold space where their teammate had once stood. "Move," Dran shouted, fury and fear mixing in his voice. "We'll avenge him later. Right now, we need to stop that thing." The team pushed forward, their resolve hardened by the loss. The creature's pulse had become even more intense now, feeding off the death that had just occurred, growing stronger with every passing second. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a manifestation of death itself, and the Deathworlders were the only ones who could stop it. They reached the base of the creature, and it became clear that their only chance was to strike at its core. The creature's glowing heart pulsed rhythmically, its energy feeding on everything around it. With a deep breath, Dran nodded to his team. It was now or never. With all the strength and fury they could muster, the Deathworlders launched their final assault. They would either save the galaxy, or they would fall with it. And they would make sure the creature knew the true meaning of humanity's fury before the end. The battle for Thalia, for the galaxy, was far from over. But the Deathworlders had made their stand, and they were not going down without a fight. The creature let out a deafening roar, a sound that shook the very air and vibrated through the bones of the Deathworlders. Its massive form reared back, its energy gathering in a swirling vortex above its head. As the Deathworlders readied themselves for the final push, they could feel the tension in the air, a gnawing anticipation that spoke of the raw, unstoppable power building inside the beast. Dran, ever the calm leader, didn't flinch. His eyes never left the creature's pulsating core, the energy at its center now flaring with an intensity that could burn the planet to dust. He knew that if they didn't destroy it in this strike, they wouldn't get another chance. The galaxy's last hope for survival rested entirely on their shoulders. The team's weapons were primed, and each Deathworlder had already accepted that this might be their final battle. "On my mark," Dran said, his voice low and steady. "We strike as one. Do not hesitate. Do not look back." The team tightened their grips on their weapons, their fingers twitching in anticipation. Every fiber of their being was attuned to the imminent conflict. They could feel the creature's gaze, as if it were watching them, analyzing them like prey. The air was thick with a suffocating silence, broken only by the roar of the creature and the faint hum of their weapons charging. The creature's energy reached its peak, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The pulse of the core was so powerful now that it felt as though it was warping reality itself, bending the laws of space and time. Dran's heart pounded in his chest, and yet in that moment, time seemed to slow. He could feel every breath, every heartbeat, like the universe itself had paused to bear witness to this battle. "Now," he commanded. The Deathworlders surged forward in unison, their movements fluid, precise, and coordinated as they rushed toward the creature. It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only option. The first few moments were a blur of motion. Heavy footsteps pounding the cracked earth, weapons raised, eyes focused on the prize ahead. The creature, sensing the attack, moved with terrifying speed. Its massive, multi-limbed body shifted, the surface of its skin rippling like water, as if it was evading their every strike. As they closed in, the creature sent out shockwaves of energy, each one powerful enough to send the Deathworlders flying. Soldiers were knocked backward, crashing into the jagged ruins of the city, but they quickly recovered, pushing forward with renewed determination. The sky above darkened as the creature unleashed another pulse of raw energy. The Deathworlders dove for cover, narrowly avoiding the blast that sent debris flying in all directions. They had no choice but to adapt and keep moving. Thran, however, saw the pattern. The creature was tiring. Its energy wasn't endless. It could be defeated, but only if they struck at the right moment. "Keep pushing," Dran shouted, his voice echoing in the chaos. Kale, the young soldier who had sensed the presence earlier, was the first to break from the group, charging directly at the creature. His every movement was instinctive. He had no time to think, only to act. He leaped over a blast of energy that could have easily killed him. landing on the creature's side with a precision that was almost too fast for the eye to follow. The creature howled in pain as Kale drove a specialized weapon into the armored plating on its side. A flash of bright blue energy sparked on impact, sending a wave of vibrations through the creature's body. The beast recoiled, its massive limbs thrashing in every direction, sending shockwaves through the ground. But Kale had already disengaged, rolling out of the way just in time to avoid another pulse of energy. "Good hit," shouted Jax, his voice rough from the battle. "Now's our chance." The rest of the team quickly followed suit, moving in synchronized patterns to avoid the creature's attacks. They had to dismantle the creature piece by piece. Its energy was the core, but its physical form was the barrier. If they could sever the connection between the two, they might be able to destroy the creature and stop the energy from spreading. Dran led the charge, moving to the front lines with the most experienced soldiers by his side. Together, they closed in on the creature's exposed core. They had one shot at this. Every second counted. The ground was shaking violently beneath their feet as the creature's energy surged once more, sending blasts of force so powerful that it felt like the entire planet was about to collapse in on itself. The Deathworlders kept advancing. The Zorak warships in orbit above had begun their bombardment, firing concentrated energy beams at the creature, attempting to weaken it from above. The combined pressure was beginning to show. The creature's movements were slower, its attacks less frequent. It was as if the energy was starting to run low, and it was now only a matter of time before they could land the final blow. Dran and his team reached the creature's core, the swirling mass of energy that pulsed with life. They knew that this was it, the creature's heart, the key to everything. The pulse of energy was overwhelming, but they pushed through it, ignoring the searing heat and the pressure building around them. With a rallying cry, Dran and his soldiers struck at the heart, their weapons charging with the full power of their might. Their strikes echoed in the silence that followed, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The creature's body shuddered violently, its energy flickering as though something was breaking inside it. And then, in a final explosion of energy, the creature's core shattered. A blinding flash engulfed the entire battlefield, and the Deathworlders were forced to shield their eyes from the intense light. For a moment, the world seemed to disappear, the universe itself holding its breath as the destructive energy dissipated. The force of the explosion sent a shockwave across the entire planet, shaking the very foundations of Thalia. But when the light finally faded and the smoke cleared, there was only silence. The creature was no more. But the cost of victory had been high. The Deathworlders stood amidst the ruins, their bodies battered and their faces covered in dust and blood. Some of them were injured, others were mourning their lost comrades. The battle for Thalia had been won, but the war was far from over. The galaxy was still in peril, and the Deathworlders knew that their journey was just beginning. They had answered the galaxy's last call for help, but now it was time for them to face the true enemy, whatever force had awakened the creature, and whatever threat still loomed over their universe. The fate of all civilizations rested on their shoulders, and they would not stop until every last one was safe. The battle was over, but the silence that followed was deafening. The Deathworlders stood in the wreckage of Thalia, their eyes scanning the desolate horizon. The creature's massive form, once an unstoppable force of nature, had been reduced to nothing more than a pile of broken pieces. Yet, as they stood victorious, their hearts were heavy with the realization that this was merely the beginning of a much larger war. Captain Dran stood at the forefront, his mind racing as he scanned the scene. His team had managed to destroy the creature, but it wasn't a victory they could fully celebrate. The loss of their comrades weighed heavily on them. Kale, Jax, and several other soldiers had made the ultimate sacrifice in the fight. Their bodies lay among the ruins of Thalia, their sacrifice etched into the very fabric of the planet. They had given everything to stop the creature, and now, in the aftermath, the team had to honor that sacrifice. Dran's eyes hardened as he thought about the task ahead. This creature, This mindless force of destruction was just one piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle they had yet to fully understand. As a human, he had learned the hard way that peace was often an illusion, and the universe was rarely as safe as it seemed. Now, with the creature vanquished, the question remained, who, or what, had unleashed it upon the galaxy? The Zorak warships, still floating in the sky above, had ceased their bombardment, and now their guns were trained on the wreckage below. They were watching, waiting for orders, but Dran knew that they weren't the true threat. The creature's destruction had temporarily silenced the battlefield, but it was a silence filled with uncertainty. The Deathworlders had taken down one monster, but what if there were more? Dran, came a voice from behind him. It was General Zira, one of the leading Zorak commanders who had come to their aid during the battle. She was tall, with silvery blue skin and eyes that reflected the wariness of someone who had fought in countless battles. Her expression was unreadable as she approached him, but the weight of the situation was clear in her stance. "General," Dran said, turning to face her. He wasn't in the mood for pleasantries, but he knew she had information he needed. "What do we know? What caused that thing to appear?" Zira looked grim. "We don't know yet, but the energy signature we detected before it appeared, it wasn't natural. This creature wasn't born of this planet or any of its moons. It's a construct, not a native species. Someone powerful, set it loose here." Dran's fists clenched at his sides. "That's what I was afraid of." Zira nodded, her eyes narrowing. "The universe is full of enemies, Dran. But this feels different. Someone is pulling strings behind the scenes. We've seen creatures like this before, but never with this kind of power or control. We may have won this battle, but the war, it's only just beginning." Dran's mind was already racing. He knew Zira was right. The galaxy was vast, full of powerful civilizations, many of which were either indifferent to humanity's existence or actively hostile toward it. The Deathworlders had earned their place among the stars, but they hadn't yet earned peace, and whatever had unleashed this creature, whatever force was responsible, was a threat to everyone, not just humanity. His eyes swept across his team, many of whom were still recovering from the battle. Some were injured, others were tending to the fallen. Kel's body lay just a few feet away, covered by a sheet of thin, reflective metal. The team had lost good men and women today, but their death wouldn't be in vain. They had secured this victory, and they had bought the galaxy a little more time. But for what? For the unknown enemies that lurked in the shadows. "Prepare the ship," Dran ordered, his voice resolute. "We're leaving Thalia. There's a bigger threat out there, and we're going to find it before it finds us." The team quickly assembled around him, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and determination. They knew what they were getting into. The galaxy had never been safe for humanity, but it had never been this dangerous. The Deathworlders were on the front lines of something far greater than they had imagined, and if they weren't careful, the universe itself might collapse under the weight of the powers hidden in the dark corners of space. "Captain," Zira said, her voice soft but filled with urgency, "there's more to this than we know. Whatever this creature was, it was only a warning. We need to act quickly before something worse comes." Dran turned to her, his expression hardening. "We faced worse. We'll face whatever comes next." Zira hesitated for a moment, her gaze lingering on the horizon, where the stars flickered in the distance, as though waiting for the next chapter of this war to unfold. "Then we'll face it together," she said, her tone firm. "The galaxy might be on the brink of collapse, but I believe in your people, Dran. I believe in the Deathworlders." Dran met her gaze. He wasn't one to believe in anything but the will to survive. But something about Zira's words struck a chord within him. They had fought together, bled together, and now, as the rest of the galaxy's fate rested in their hands, they would stand together once more. "Then let's finish this," Dran said, his voice carrying the weight of determination and resolve. As the team boarded their ship and prepared for departure, the vast, broken landscape of Talia stretched before them, silent and still, but forever marked by the battle that had just taken place. The creature was dead, but the echoes of its destruction would reverberate throughout the galaxy for years to come. And as the Deathworlders ship ascended into the cold, infinite blackness of space, the stars above them seemed to whisper of things yet to come. Dark things, things they weren't ready for, but things they would face nonetheless. For they were humanity's last line of defense, and the galaxy would learn soon enough that when humanity's Deathworlders answer the call, the universe should tremble. The war had just begun. As the Deathworlders ship tore through the atmosphere, rising into the cold void of space, Captain Dran stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the swirling stars ahead. The calmness of space was deceptive, almost haunting, as though the universe was waiting for the inevitable storm to hit. His mind raced as the events of the battle replayed in his thoughts. The sacrifice, the uncertainty, and the lingering question of what they were really up against. The creature they had just destroyed was only one piece of something much larger, much darker. "We need answers," Dran muttered to himself, his fingers tightening around the controls. Behind him, the rest of the crew was silent. They had just left the battlefield behind, and while victory had been claimed, the weight of the loss still clung to them. Kel's sacrifice was fresh in their minds, as was the bloody battlefield on Thalia. The Deathworlders had given their all, but it was never enough. In the grand scheme of things, victory was fleeting. The true enemy, the force that had unleashed the creature, was still out there. "Captain." Zira's voice broke through his thoughts. She had entered the bridge and was standing behind him now, her eyes reflecting the same uncertainty he felt. "We've received a communication from the Zorak fleet. They're calling for a meeting." "A meeting?" Dran turned, a brow arched. What could they possibly want now? "We've already wiped out the creature, haven't we? What more do they think we can do?" Zira looked down for a moment before answering, her expression somber. "They want to discuss the next phase. They've analyzed the creature's remains, and they found something disturbing." Dran's interest peaked. Disturbing. What could possibly be worse than what we've already seen? "They think the creature was a test," she continued. "A trial run for something much larger. A force is gathering out there. Something dark, something far beyond our understanding. If we don't act quickly, they fear we'll be the first targets." Dran's pulse quickened. "You're telling me this was just the beginning?" Zira's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes. And the worst part is, we may already be too late." Dran stood motionless, his mind digesting the information. It was no longer about defending humanity, or even about saving the galaxy. It was about survival. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, but the Deathworlders had seen enough to know that they were the last line of defense. No one else was coming to help. Humanity's Deathworlders had to face this threat alone, just as they had always done. He took a deep breath. "We'll meet with the Zorak, but we're not waiting for their orders. We'll take the fight to them before they have a chance to organize." Zira gave a curt nod. "Agreed. But be warned, Captain. We may be walking into something we can't fight with just our fists. These beings, whoever they are, they might not even be human." Dran exhaled sharply, knowing she was right. The galaxy was vast, filled with unknown entities, and yet humanity had made enemies in every corner of space. They had fought, bled, and survived wars that spanned centuries. But this new threat, this felt different. The creatures they had encountered before, from alien invaders to the brutal forces of nature, were nothing compared to the kind of darkness the Zorak were describing. The Zorak fleet's communication arrived shortly after, a hologram flickering to life in front of them. A tall, regal figure appeared, General Naxara, the leader of the Zorak. She was formidable in stature, her blue skin shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, locked onto Dran's with an intensity that made him feel small for the first time in years. "Captain Dran," General Naxara began, her voice calm yet heavy with authority. "We've analyzed the creature's genetic makeup. It was far more than a mere beast. It was a bioengineered weapon, likely created by an ancient civilization that had access to powers we can't even begin to understand. What we face is a threat unlike any we've ever encountered. A force that has remained hidden for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike." Dran listened intently, absorbing every word. "Hidden. For how long?" "For as long as the galaxy has known peace," Naxara replied, her voice filled with quiet dread. "There are ancient records, lost to time, that speak of a race, the Obsidian Order. They were a civilization so advanced that they could manipulate the fabric of reality itself. They disappeared millennia ago, but their creations, their weapons, are still out there. And they've begun to stir." Dran's thoughts raced. "You're telling me we're facing an enemy we've never seen before, and that they've been hiding in the shadows all this time?" "Yes," Naxara said with a grim nod. "But it's worse than that. The creature you just destroyed was not an isolated incident. There are more, and they are already active on other planets. We believe they are preparing for an invasion, one that will wipe out entire civilizations, starting with us." Dran's mind raced as he absorbed the implications of Naxara's words. The Deathworlders were humanity's last hope, but could they even stand a chance against such an advanced and destructive force? "You said the creature was a test," Dran said, his voice low. "What's the real plan? What are they trying to achieve?" Naxara's face hardened. "They're building an army, a force capable of wiping out entire star systems in one strike. And we have no idea how to stop them. But we have to try, or else everything we fought for will be for nothing." A heavy silence fell over the room as the weight of the situation settled in. The galaxy was on the brink, and the Deathworlders were the only ones who could stop it. Dran knew that this was not just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the very future of every living being in the galaxy. "We'll take the fight to them," Dran declared, his voice filled with resolve. "We'll hit them first, before they can fully organize. Whatever this Obsidian Order is, they won't have a chance against humanity's Deathworlders." Naxara's eyes gleamed with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Then prepare yourselves, Captain. The war we're entering now will not be fought with weapons alone. It will be a battle of will, of strategy, and of survival. And it's a battle you may not win." Dran met her gaze with unflinching determination. "We didn't come this far to lose." With that, the hologram flickered out, leaving Dran standing in the silence of the bridge once again. He turned to Zira, his eyes burning with purpose. "Set a course," he said. "We find these Obsidian Order, and we end this war before it even starts." As the ship's engines roared to life, the Deathworlders moved into action. They knew what they were up against now, an enemy shrouded in mystery, with power beyond comprehension. But they were Deathworlders, and if there was one thing they had learned over the years, it was that they would never back down from a fight, no matter how impossible it seemed. The galaxy might tremble before the Obsidian Order, but humanity would stand tall, and they would fight to the end.